Namaskar. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I welcome Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, and members of the Indian and South African Indian communities to this beautiful evening in the mother city of South Africa. Honorable AM is in Cape Town leading an official delegation to participate in the meeting of BRICS foreign ministers. The last 3 days have been eventful with multilateral and bilateral engagements with different countries. Dear community members, the government under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister has always accorded the highest priority to diaspora engagement, which is based on 4 C's: care, connect, celebrate, and contribute. Sir, I would like to give a snapshot of the Indian community in South Africa and in this province. A major part of the community arrived between 1860 and 1911 as indentured labor to work in the sugarcane and agricultural plantations in Natal. They were mostly drawn from the present-day Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, with some from eastern UP and Bihar. There was another wave of Indians, a community of traders who mainly hailed from the present-day Gujarat and Maharashtra. In addition to Natal, a segment of the trading community settled in Cape Town also. The story of their forefathers, of how they overcame adversity and built their lives and built life for themselves, is inspiring. Today, they are a very successful community and have distinguished themselves in diverse areas like politics, government, education, business, finance, and other service industries. Sir, a slice of non-resident Indians resident in Cape Town is also present in this hall. They operate in Indian companies and joint ventures in the information technology sector, in the startup space, and some are researchers and academics in the universities. The Indian community resident in Western Cape has been a pillar of support to the consulate. They have always partnered us in all our outreach efforts and regularly took part in celebrations with energy and enthusiasm. In addition to those from Cape Town, we also have prominent members of the community, Indian and South African Indian, from Johannesburg and Durban as well. Many of them play a key role in public life and our bilateral commercial relations. I especially thank them for their effort to join us today and make this event a grand success. Before I conclude, I request all of you to rise and observe a minute's silence for victims of the tragic train accident in Odisha yesterday. Thank you. I now request the MC to introduce the Honorable Minister. Thank you all once again. Jai Hind.
Thank you for those welcome remarks. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our special guest, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister of India. Dr. S. Jaishankar is India's External Affairs Minister since 30th of May 2019. He is a member of the Upper House, the Rajya Sabha of India's Parliament from the state of Gujarat. He was Foreign Secretary from 2015 to 2018, Ambassador to the United States from 2013 to 2015, China from 2009 to 2013, and the Czech Republic from 2000 to 2004. He was High Commissioner to Singapore from 2007 to 2009. He He has also served in other diplomatic assignments in embassies in Moscow, Colombo, Budapest, and Tokyo, as well in the Ministry of External Affairs and the President's Secretariat. He was also president of the Global Corporate Affairs at Tata Sons Private Limited from May 2018. Dr. Jaishankar is a graduate of St. Stephen's College at the University of Delhi. He has a master's in political science and an MPhil and PhD in international relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. He is a recipient of the Padma Shri Award in 2019 and has written a widely acclaimed best-selling book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, which was published in 2020. I think most of you who have been following Dr. Jaishankar and the meetings, BRICS meetings in the last couple of days would have heard him make some comments about BRICS being a symbol of change and that old ways cannot address new situations. I think those sentiments resonate with most of us. So welcome you, Honorable Minister, to come forward and address this audience. Thank you.
Namaskar. Good evening. Acting High Commissioner, Consul General, dear friends, it's really a very great pleasure to be with all of you this evening. I'm completing my visit to South Africa. I leave tomorrow, but I've had a very, very good 3 days here. And it's always nice to meet members of the Indian community. It's something which is very much a part of our tradition, and I'm delighted I can do that this evening. Listening to the Consul General, it also struck me that many of your forefathers came from Tamil Nadu and Andhra, and that's where my forefathers also came from. And some of you hail from Gujarat, and that's what I represent in Parliament. So perhaps I have a deeper connect with many of you than most Indian ministers. So I kind of revel in that for a moment. I must say, I was very struck by your introduction to Vande Mataram, because in a way, I think the message was very much of a globalized world where Indians and people of Indian origin really live across multiple countries, and wherever they are, they have been contributing citizens. They have been really both in many ways a successful example in the country where they reside, but they also are a source of pride for the country from which they come. Now, what I thought I would do today was, since I'm here both as an Indian minister in South Africa, but also representing my country at the BRICS, I would like to share with you my thoughts on 3 subjects. One, India-South Africa relations, of which we will formally be marking 30 years this November. Our diplomatic relations began with the independence of South Africa 30 years ago. To share a little bit with you what happened, how what we think about the BRICS and why that is important, not just for India, but also for India and South Africa. And we are again marking 15 years of BRICS summits. This is the 15th summit, which will happen a few months from now in Johannesburg. And I should also add, we are entering a decade in India of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. We have completed 9 years. So these three subjects, 30 years of India-South Africa ties, 15 years of BRICS, 9 years of Modi Sarkar. These are three subjects on which I thought I would share some views. So let me start with India and South Africa. I think most of you know that our connections are not just between two countries who have similar views. There is something very deeply emotional about our connect. From the time when India got its independence, in fact, pretty much from the very moment we got our independence, there was a very strong sentiment in India that our independence would not be complete until South Africa got its independence. And the reason for that was that our respective struggles were so deeply intertwined, and that was, of course, most vividly expressed by the personality and by the message of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, as we became independent and continued to support South Africa in its struggle against apartheid, the symbolism of Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi took very deep root. So there was a particular association that we had both with Nelson Mandela as a inspirational figure, but also of him as the leader of a people who are struggling to control their own future and to establish their own identity. And it was very natural that, when South Africa got its independence, there was as much celebration in India as there was in this very country. And I still remember at that time I was actually in Delhi, and I remember all our public buildings, Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Parliament, the Central Secretariat, were all actually lit up in celebration of what was happening here. And when we did establish our diplomatic footprint, this was actually a country where we not only had a High Commission, but also three other cities had an almost immediate presence of India, so Cape Town, Joburg and Durban. And since then, I think the tradition of close relations has continued. We were very honored to have President Ramaphosa as the chief guest of our Republic Day in 2019. And I would say that that cordiality, that very sort of intuitive support that we extend to each other has become today a very central part of our traditions. And so we have really India and South Africa located at two different continents, but working together very closely in the United Nations, in the BRICS, of which we are members, in a body called IPSA, which is India, Brazil, and South Africa, and in a variety of ways between the two of us directly. Now, our relations in these 3 decades have I think, flowered in every conceivable sense. Today, we have a trade account of about $18 billion. We are, in fact, I think South Africa's 4th largest trade partner, if I'm right. And South Africa is our largest trade partner in Africa. And obviously that, the relationship is something that we continue to work upon. We hope very much to see trade and investments. We are a major investor in this country, expand in the years to come. And we also hope to see that the exchanges between us in various spheres continue to multiply. I should also add that both of us are members of the G20 grouping, and South Africa has been very much a source of support for us there. Now, when I contemplate the relationship and look at various developments in some form or the other, this relationship has always been supportive of any initiative that has happened. In fact, Ambassador Puneet Kundal was telling me that the International Day of Yoga, which is one of our major initiatives which at the beginning of Prime Minister Modi's government, I'm told that this very hall actually hosted the first yoga event as part of those celebrations. But today we have moved 8 years later to a different initiative. It is something called the International Year of Millets, because we believe very strongly that the production and consumption of millets would make a world of a difference to global food security. And here too, it's an endeavor in which South Africa is supportive. And these last few years, which have been very difficult for all of us because of the COVID, actually that sense of solidarity has become even stronger. This was one of the early countries where we sent vaccines, and then we cooperated with South Africa to ensure that the vaccines were consumed by countries who needed it very badly at that time. As we come out of it and get on with life, there are different initiatives, and it could be something as interesting for all of us like cricket, where we see South African players, we see South African coaches. I think we have a very close association with the SA20 league, and if my memory is right, I think this is also the hometown of Faf du Plessis. So I know that, thank you, that cricket is also a significant bonding between us. It could be in our Diaspora Connect. There have been, I think, 15 awardees from South Africa in the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Awards, which is entirely fitting considering how not just how deep our connect is, but the fact that the celebration of the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas is actually a day which connects us to South Africa. It is the day when Mahatma Gandhi came back from this country. Or indeed the recent initiative we have of trying to exchange experiences and in a sphere like wildlife. South Africa is one of the countries which has sent us cheetahs, and today we are trying to build on that to create something called the Big Cat Alliance. So as you can see, in every conceivable way, this relationship has grown very steadily. When I look around the world at close to about 200 countries, and just gut reaction, look at the world and say, okay, who are some of our closest friends? I think this country very, very naturally comes to mind, and that is something which is reflected in a lot of what we say. Now, obviously, as we will be marking 33 decades of our contemporary relationship, a thought which will come to everybody's mind is, what is the vision for the relationship beyond that? So, I will speak to you about what is happening in India in terms of how we contemplate the future. But definitely, we do see a much more I would say, a world of greater mobility, a world of greater sort of knowledge exchanges, if you would. A large part of what is happening in India and South Africa reflects a global trend where countries whose cultures and identities and interests were suppressed in previous decades and centuries today are finding expression. So there will be journeys we will undertake, there will be points of intersection on that journeys, there will be times when we will motivate each other, support each other, and certainly we see the rise of Africa as very much to the, central to the larger trend of history, of which again rise of India is such an important point. So let me shift from that to the more immediate task which brought me to South Africa, which is the BRICS summit, the BRICS foreign ministers meeting. And we are, of course, preparing for the summit in August. So what I do want to tell you with regard to BRICS is that, this is a grouping which started 17 years ago. We started meeting at a president, prime minister's level almost 15 years ago. And what it does really is for the 5 countries involved in it, these are countries, in a sense you could say these are non-Western countries who find this as a platform for greater cooperation on issues that are of interest to them. This could be political cooperation, it could be in working together on particular issues like environment or trade or technology or sometimes even countering terrorism. But most of all, it creates among them a kind of a working culture and a coordination of different institutions and parts of society. So there's a lot of people-to-people exchanges, experts exchanges, comfort levels which grow out of that. And today, this is considered an increasingly serious platform. And of course, those of you who would have followed it would know that one of our challenges is that there's a lot of interest in the world among other countries how to associate themselves more closely with the BRICS. Having shared that, I will now like to take you back to India, to developments there. And as I said, we have just completed 9 years of the Modi government. And it is an occasion. It is an occasion to reflect on those 9 years, to weigh our achievements, to look at, the tasks that are still before us. I think there are many things that we have good reason to be proud of. But there are equally, I think, issues that we know we still have to do a greater effort to address. And when I spoke about 30 years and the vision beyond, it's interesting that India is today in a very similar mode, which is we marked 75 years of our independence. But what Prime Minister Modi is trying to get us all to do is actually to focus on the era ahead. And I use the word era because typically in Indian politics, the tendency has been to look at a political term. The next 5 years or whatever remains of it till the next election. But in fact, the change is really that we are looking really very seriously at what Prime Minister has called the Amrit Kal, the next 25 years. So the challenge that he has posed to the nation, to all of us, particularly to the younger generation, is really what is your ambition for the next 25 years? Where will India be in 2047? So that is the kind of I would say, the commitment and the mindset with which we are working. But having said that, I would also want you to think about the challenges that we have experienced, not just in the last 9 years, but particularly in this last 3 or 4 years when COVID was a serious issue before us. I can't think of any country, frankly, any individual who would have been left unaffected by the COVID. So to say that, we suffered, we all lost someone near to us, that we went through a difficult experience would probably be a gross statement. I think when people called it a once-in-a-century challenge, there's a reason why it is put so strongly and so graphically. But what was, I think, significant about India's response was that a country which, when the COVID to directly on a daily basis, frankly on an hourly basis, to deal with COVID. When we looked at, the specter that confronted us at the beginning of 2020, it was truly, to say it was a formidable challenge would be a gross understatement. That we found that, for a variety of reasons, our health infrastructure was insufficient. We were not manufacturing masks or PPEs or ventilators. Many of us had not even heard of these terms, leave alone actually seen this. So the first challenge was actually to immediately respond in a public health way to the requirements of COVID. And I would say that when I think back of what the entire country did in 2020, it was actually a remarkable collective effort that you saw at a fantastic speed across the country. COVID centers come up. We scrambled in the initial period to see what we could get from abroad, but clearly even globally things were in short supply. And within a year, actually a country about whom the entire world was worrying about. I recall the first G20 meeting we had, where actually pretty much the briefer said that when they looked around the world, one of the countries they were most worried about was India. So the initial sense was that we would take the hardest hit. Of course we took a hit. Everybody took a hit at that time. But what perhaps I think we surprised ourselves in a way was the resilience and the tenacity with which, and the creativity with which actually India dealt with this issue. And from a country which was the object of international concern and worry, we actually ended up as a supplier of medicines for 150 countries in the world, including a large part of them developed countries, and about 100 nations in the world. And this was not just an achievement, but I think after that could rightly call ourselves as a pharmacy of the world. But I think it was an achievement because we also ensured that a lot of countries who were left behind when it came to vaccines and medicines, their needs were taken care of. And even today, it's now 2 years after the event. I was recently in the Caribbean and Central America, and not just from the government, not just from my counterpart ministers. Actually, I've experienced directly hearing from ordinary citizens in these countries that when things looked very bad for them, India stepped forward. And I think many countries in the world will not forget this in a hurry. And I would say certainly as the chief diplomat of the country, I can actually sense that goodwill which has accrued from it. But while COVID was going on, actually there was another big change which was taking place in this country, and it was a change which was initiated as soon as Prime Minister Modi came into power. And when I look back on it, I think most of us, and I'll be very honest to admit, I would include myself in it, we probably did not fully understand what he was trying to do. And as an example, I would cite to you the exhortation he had that, people should open bank accounts, that everybody should open bank accounts. And even if you don't have money, at least open a bank account. And it was difficult to do because the banks initially themselves were not open to people with low or no deposits wanting to open accounts. Now, if I were to fast forward that to the period of the COVID, the fact that most of our citizens, most of our families had bank accounts enabled us actually to transfer money, give direct cash support during the COVID. If the vision of the Prime Minister in 2014-15 to get this whole, Jan Dhan program moving, if that had not happened in 14, I can tell you in 2020-21 we'd have been at our wits' end on how do we actually support our population at a time when especially a large part of the informal economy had sort of closed up. So a big part of the story of the last 9 years is actually these social safety changes, the social safety net in a way, which has been created. And when you look at the numbers of this net, you have individual programs which are probably the size of a country's population, sometimes the size of a continent's population, sometimes more than that. So one challenge we had, for example, and a very early challenge, was when we had actually the lockdown. How do you take care of the food needs of the population? And at the cabinet meeting that we had, Prime Minister Modi actually said that he reminded us, in fact, we all studied the Spanish flu a century before COVID, because the point he made is there are lessons from the Spanish flu that we need to absorb and ensure this does not happen again on his watch. And one of them was that a lot of people died of famine in India during the Spanish flu. So how do you actually keep a large society afloat in terms of its food needs during a lockdown? This was a huge challenge. And what the fact that the Aadhaar card, the digital backbone had been created, that it was linked to other digital bases, that people had a bank account. So you had a Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile synthesis, if you will. This is actually the backbone which got us through the COVID and which is today the foundation of actually building a modern digital society in India with a safety net. So the number of beneficiaries actually for this entire period, and which continues till today, a number about 800 million people. So we were actually giving food support to a population of the entire size of Europe and the United States put together. And I mean, the amazing thing was, once we started doing it, it went so smoothly that today we actually take it as a fact of life. I mean, people don't even talk about it. They just have absorbed it as something which is the responsibility of the government, which it is, to ensure. So, almost, I would say, on the run at a period of deep stress, we ended up, those of you who are familiar with the United States would have heard of something called food stamps program. So what took many developed countries actually decades to create, and many of them very honestly have not been able to implement it so efficiently, that has actually come about with India. Now I'm giving you an example. I'm giving you an example of, what happened in terms of COVID and what today continues in different ways in the country. But let me give you a very different program, and many of you would find it of interest, because I think when you go back to India today, these are among the changes that you will find. That there is a big home building and home ownership program. Because at the heart of that is the Prime Minister's belief that, the Indian society must be a society of homeowners, that this is something very fundamental. It's fundamental as a right, but the dignity and the confidence that comes with home ownership is even more powerful a factor. Now, in these 9 years, under a program called Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, we have actually built 30 million homes. Okay. Now, if you take this average size of an Indian family, which is 5 people, that means actually there are 150 million Indians today who in the last 9 years have become residents of homes which they own. That, I must tell you, is more than the population of Japan. Now, if you take pretty much any program, there's one program which all of you would have heard of about replacing firewood with cooking gas. Now, the beneficiaries of that are 96 million people. That's more than the population of Germany. So, I'm putting that to you because I want you to appreciate today really what is the scale at which change is taking place in India. You've heard of the toilet programs. Now, if I were to tell you that 117 million toilets have been built, do understand how much of an impact it has had, not just on sanitation, not just on personal cleanliness, actually on people's health. So, this scale, connecting to electricity, for example, connecting piped water to people's houses. Now, again, these numbers today, you have about 120 million houses today for whom piped water has been connected. So, if you have, and as I said, multiply that by 5. So, if you look today at, water connection, electricity connection, even health, there is a program called Ayushman Bharat, which is essentially a program to give people health access at affordable rates. That is not just the doctor you see, it is backed up also by a very reasonable access to medicines. So there's a kind of like a people's pharmacy where you get generics at really low cost. So when you look at health insurance, when you look at affordable medicines and affordable treatment, which is backed by insurance, then I think you can see really that something like about 30% of the population has actually already got covered by this scheme. So this scale of change which is taking place in India, I think that is really, when we speak about the transformation of these 9 years, that is really the change, and that is something which I think the Indian community abroad, the non-resident Indians abroad, and I would say even the friends and well-wishers of India abroad, they need to understand that this is something very powerful, very big, which is going on. This is no longer the India which was kind of lumbering around at a relatively slow pace, where we hoped one day that we would be like a country which we visited the last time we went abroad. This time actually we are in many, many areas. Actually, and I say this particularly when it comes to digital. I'm a very, very sober person. I mean, you very rarely would hear me say that I'm doing better than somebody else. I keep that feeling always in check. But I must tell you, when it comes to digital, I can assert with a great deal of confidence that I see practices in India, efficiencies in India, which I don't see even if I go to Europe and North America. And I think that's an enormous leapfrogging that we have had. Now, other than this, I do also want to emphasize that the Indian economy is today clearly an economy on the rebound. Our recovery after COVID has been strong. We are the large economy which is posting the strongest growth rate. We, I think, again, are fairly confident. I saw that we had corrected our growth upwards in the last few weeks. So I think the general sense is that we will grow by between 6.5%, perhaps a little bit higher in this coming year. But this growth would become more robust in the coming times. But it isn't just growth, because there were periods in the 1990s and the first decade of 2000 when people spoke about growth figures. It is also in the nature of the growth, that it is a growth where there is much greater manufacturing in India, where there is much greater employment in India, where we are creating systems, as many other very I'd say strong economic players have done, for example in East Asia, where actually you support your vendor chains, you support your own talent, your innovation, your skill. So when you hear talk about what is called Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is like a self-reliant India, do understand, a self-reliant India is not a protectionist India. It is not an India that is closing itself to the world. It is an India which is actually making more in India, but making more for the world and making more with the world. We are actually today actively trying to forge partnerships. Again, one of the indices of success has been the growing amount of foreign direct investments we've attracted. Last year was the highest ever. We were the biggest recipient of foreign investment anywhere in the world. It was about $86 billion. And we see this expressed in various, almost every day. If you were to pick up a financial newspaper in India, sometimes even a non-financial one, you'll read some news, company X, Apple has come, Cisco has come, Google is coming, somebody else. So there is today, I would say, a big push, because between, I would say frankly, better government, fast, neater, simpler, less corruption-free. Because remember, one of the good things about digital is digital has fingerprints everywhere. Okay, you can track digital. I mean, it could be your passport, it could be your income tax, it could be the recipient of money from the government. Because the sender is known and the recipient is known and the passage is known, today it's had a remarkable impact on good governance. That, very bluntly put, the scope for corruption has come down dramatically. And that has been, as all of you know, a bane in our system for many, many decades. So this better governance, making it easier to do business, giving facilities to attract manufacturing. And again, I say this to you, as people who are currently or perhaps permanently domiciled abroad. When you go back to India, again, a big change you will see is the enormous infrastructure change that is taking place. There's not a city, go from place A to place B anywhere in India, and I guarantee you that you will see some, project which is taking place, a road, a tunnel, electricity, a metro, an airport, a railway line. The place is really humming with that, and again, a lot of that is how to do it better. And Prime Minister had this initiative called Gati Shakti, which was really how do you integrate these different aspects of infrastructure, because often we would have different departments stepping on each other's toes. You'd build a road and the next guy would come and cut the road in order to put the optical fiber cable, and then somebody else will come and cut it again to do the water. So how do you do this all together and actually get the best results. I think that too. So one part of it, as I said, are these socio-economic changes. One part of it is the infrastructure changes which are taking place. And then again, you can see it in the farming side, that this year we expect to actually post the highest ever food grain production, which we had, which is 315 million metric ton. And we hope to do it at a time when actually a large part of the world, including us, we are struggling with climate change. So despite climate change and all the problems associated with it, our hope, not just hope, our expectation from the agricultural feedback we have is that that sector is looking up as well. You can see this in education. Again, if you look at the in the last 9 years, 390 universities have been set up, new universities have been set up. So there is a big expansion of education, of skills. There's a startup culture. In fact, for me, one of the changes as someone who's been going off and on to universities is when I today go to a university, the kind of confidence I see young people very proudly showing you patents, talking patents, showing you inventions. This is not the kind of education that I went through. For us, it was about getting good marks, and there's some guy with a gold medal, and that was the person everybody looked at. These are people today who are very confident about how, even while they are studying, they are willing to shape the where the country is going. So I thought I would sort of dilate at some length, because it's important for people who are living abroad to get a good sense of what is happening in India. And that sense, I want to tell you, is really today, into the 10th year, a great sense of achievement, but a very serious sense of the task still before us. The thinking really is, okay, how do you reach out into the next 25 years? Now, I'll just round it off with a little bit of what I do as a foreign minister to promote this, okay? My job, along with all my colleagues in the foreign ministry and people in other parts of the government who work with us, is to ensure that one part of it is to make sure nothing happens in the world which harms India, which threatens our security, which makes it difficult for us to get resources, which creates problems like inflation or scarcity of resources. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is actually to look out at the world and see the opportunities there. Look at the best practices which go on in the world. And when I present to you this picture of an India that is changing, I would also say there's a great willingness today to learn from the progress in other parts of the world. So it could be some great railway project in Japan, or it could be some other country like South Korea cleaning up its rivers, or some plant which is doing mobility, electric mobility in US. So a large part of it is how do you today accelerate national development. The other part of it is, of course, that when a country which is today the most populous country, which is already the 5th largest economy, which is very confident that it will probably be the 3rd largest before the end of the decade, when a country like this rises, it's a very profound happening. And when this country is a 5,000-year-old civilization, it's not just another country's rise. It is actually the return to the global stage of an old civilization with all the traditions, the knowledge, the culture, the heritage which this is. So today the rise of India, how do you facilitate the rise of India? How do you accelerate the rise of India? How do you make sure that in this rise this is as smooth as possible, that there are no external events which impact this growth. That, in many ways, today is the task for us in foreign policy. That is what we focus on. And again, as I said, what happens inside the country, what happens outside the country, today these are really very, very closely tied together. So the overall picture, as I said, as I present to you, is, to my mind, one of great confidence at home, one with very significant achievements, but also one where there is a great deal of ambition that, how do we, in the next 25 years, really show to the next generation that they have today the capability of doing much bigger things on a much grander scale. It's also the rise, as I said, of a civilizational state which will make its impact and which will also inspire others in different parts of the world to do something similar. It will reflect itself in strong relations, especially with friends like South Africa. It will, again, be manifest in the big diplomatic events such as what you will see in the BRICS in the coming years. So that's the picture which I wanted to share with you. You've all been very patient. I hope I haven't overloaded you with some of this, but these are subjects which, as I said, I felt that it's important, because when I travel within India, often in meetings which we do, in universities or with the public or with professional organizations, a lot of them are very today deeply involved in this sense of change. And, for us it's important that the diaspora, the people of our community, people of Indian origin who live abroad, also participate, also have that sense of involvement in the change in India. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be very, very happy to listen to any comments you may have, any advice you might give, any sentiments you may express. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you for those wonderful words, Honorable Minister. I think, you started your speech with about the emotional connect between India and South Africa. And although my generation, which is I think a lot of the people around here, we might be fourth generation South African, but because of the history you mentioned and India's stand during apartheid, a lot of us have strong connections with India, despite being very South African. And I think you also mentioned the cricket link, and I think that's one of the areas where we as South Africans are greatly conflicted, especially when South Africa and India play.
Go with the winning team when that happens.
Minister, it also gives us great pride to hear from you the details of the strides India has made. And I think for many of us sitting here, when you speak about the levels and the scale at which change is taking place, especially when you mention connecting electricity and piped water to homes, I think that is felt by us very deeply. And I think that when you mention the scale, I think it's, and I'm sure somebody will have the question, is what you can do at BRICS to make sure that these things happen at a similar scale here in South Africa for us. So at this stage, Minister, I'm going to take a few questions, And after a first round of 3 questions, we'll answer that and take it. So if there are any questions, comments, I would ask you to please keep your question brief. You will identify yourself and then ask your question. So I'm going to take first the gentleman here.
Firstly, thank you very much, sir, for providing this opportunity to speak with you one-on-one at this distance. Thank you very much for coming here, all the way here, and meeting us at the Indian community. And just from a personal thank you to you, one of the decisions that you may have made during COVID positively impacted my family who were stuck here through the Vande Bharat mission. So I would love to thank you for that. Just one comment. You mentioned about greater mobility going forward between India and South Africa. Since we have this large cooperation between the two countries, one of the biggest challenges that we have as Indians living in South Africa is immigration. So my request to you would be if you could facilitate better immigration partnership between the two countries so that we can have easy access, myself, our families who can come here, work and live in South Africa, and possibly the other way around as well. That would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take another question. Oh, okay, sorry.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much. So, sir, I'm in this country for 21 years, and I do a lot of business with India. I love to take India all over the world. I do business in South Africa, in Africa, and Latin America. But I always have one biggest challenge, is our pricing, how we compete with China. So, for example, if you look at now in South Africa, electricity is such a big thing, and solar is it's imperative, and there's no stock here. So next month, end of this month, I'm going to Surat, again to Gujarat, to negotiate with the company how we can bring the price down to compete with China. So like, sir, you were saying $16 billion in the global economy is not a lot. So even if I can give solar to 1 lakh houses in South Africa, it's another $1 billion of trade. So we need to find a solution, of course, the experience, maybe some rebates or something else that we can do to import these things to South Africa and put it also in Africa. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll take one more question before the Minister responds.
Jai Hind, sir. My name is Rushi. I would like to thank you for being the great Angada to our Lord Rama and putting the Vishwa Guru that Bharat is in front of the world and the place that Bharat deserves. So my question is twofold. The first question is the war information that's going on, and without naming any individual or making this about politics, but there is an individual right now on US truck trying to spread misinformation, and unfortunately, those headlines sells in the media. So as an individual, what can we do at our level to stop that kind of misinformation that being spread to gain the political gains? And the second question would be, this being our karma bhumi, what is our matrabhumi is doing to help this energy crisis that are faced by our beloved country, South Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Minister, would you like to respond first?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned the Vande Bharat mission because it was first of all probably the largest kind of evacuation that any country has ever done, anytime. Just the scale of it was very staggering. But rather than kind of wallow in that achievement, to me there's a big lesson there. And the lesson is that in an era where a lot of Indians work abroad, where people, where you need not be an Indian national, but you have an interest in India, family members may be there or family members are here who want to go back there. Given the globalization of Indians today, it is important that we put in place systems which will respond to difficult situations. Okay. Now, sometimes they can be very country specific. Now, we had a few weeks ago a very nasty situation in Sudan, and we had 5,000 Indians there. Okay. Last year, when the fighting started in Ukraine, we had more than 20,000 Indians there. Now, in fact, when I look at these last 9 years, almost every year, we've had one situation somewhere. It was Yemen, it was Yemen civil war, it was Nepal earthquake, it was South Sudan fighting. So it's something which will keep happening. And we have that fundamental obligation today to take care of Indians working, living, traveling abroad. Okay. So one part, I think, of foreign policy today is extremely focused on this securing the welfare of Indian citizens abroad. Now, it could be something like providing a flight. Okay. But it could even be, sometimes there are people who are stuck abroad, who have no money, or who are stuck in cases, they can't afford it. We unfortunately have cases sometimes of people who pass away and, who brings the body back. Now, it could even be documentation. One of the big changes, I must tell you, I was waxing on the virtues of being digital. The most profound change actually, and the earliest change, was actually when it came to passport services. That there was a time, if you lost your passport, you would come to me in an embassy and I'll tell you, yes, sure, I'll have to go check up, who issued your passport, go to that RPO, wait till they tell me that you are really you before I give you your document. Today, actually, I access a database and get that whole thing done like this. So the impact today of, as I said, of when you have an intent of good government, when you use the tools, all of this today actually helps the globally mobile Indian. And that's a very, very big change. Now, your particular concern also about mobility and immigration where this country is concerned. I do gather that there are, we, for example, extend e-visas to South African nationals, which means somebody sitting here can go on the computer, do their application, they get a receipt, they're done with it. So, and it works very, very smoothly. Now, we have not seen the counterpart arrangement. I understand, for example, there are challenges on intra-company transferees. Or family members joining. So I'm very cognizant of it. I have mentioned it to my colleague, and I hope that in the coming months we have a body called the Joint Commission where we sit government to government and talk these matters over. And certainly for me, how do you do easier, smoother mobility is a very important part, because without mobility, you're not going to grow trade, you're not going to increase investment, you're not going to do projects. The rest of life will not happen if mobility doesn't happen smoothly. So that message, I think, needs to be appreciated by everybody, and certainly I can tell you, where the Indian government is concerned, it will be our strong priority to push that. On the pricing and the China issue, look, what happened was China, started its reforms about 15 years before us, and they did it on scale. Now we lost a certain period, 1980s, 1990s. Today, we are actually pushing very strongly. When I speak about Atmanirbhar Bharat, when I mention manufacturing in India, what is it we are trying to do? Yes, sure, we all want solar energy, but I would certainly like that solar panel to be made in India. I would like the battery storage to be made in India. So this will only happen if we are able to, if the government encourages manufacturing, government creates the infrastructure which facilitates it. Because manufacturing will not come if you have lousy infrastructure. I mean, they are related to each other. It will not come if it doesn't have the human talent to service it. So whether it is, talent, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's an easier business environment, they all go together. And at the end of the day, this is about employment. So that's one of the sort of big changes we are doing. And I can certainly tell you there will be many areas where you will not have that pricing complaint. I think today, for example, in pharma, you certainly will not have that complaint. There will be many areas where I would suggest to you, you may actually have a quality advantage. So maybe you shouldn't be looking completely at pricing either. So do that, but I take your point. I think I can only say we are kind of working on it very strongly. I hope with the passage of time, that complaint of yours will sort of disappear. The young gentleman there about his remarks. Angad is a very interesting person because he is one of the diplomats actually of Ramayana. Now there was some cleverness about Angad which therefore I treat your remark as a compliment, Wait. I haven't finished yet. So, for example, he sort of increases his tail so that when he's not offered a seat when he goes to meet Ravan. So he sits on his own tail, but he elongates his tail so that he sits finally on a higher position than Ravan. So there is sometimes diplomats have to be clever and score points. But Angad also, remember, in the search for Sita, actually loses heart. And it requires Hanuman to sort of strengthen his courage and tell him, no, we'll find a way of finding her. But I know you mean it well, so I take the compliment part of it because I don't tend to lose heart. But your other question, how do you react to what some people who go to the US say on some things? Look, I say that I can only talk for myself. I try when I go abroad not to do politics abroad. For this reason, I'm perfectly prepared to argue and argue very vigorously at home. Okay, so you will never find me wanting in that regard. But I think even a democratic culture has a certain collective responsibility. There is a national interest, there is a collective image. There are sometimes things bigger than politics. And when you step outside the country, I think that's important to remember. So I may differ strongly with someone. I could say to you I differ with them, but how I countered it, I would like to go back at home and do it, and watch me when I get back.
Thank you. So we'll take another 3 questions, this last 3 questions for this evening.
Namaskaram, Honorable Minister. I'm represented here this evening by my wife, Rekha Ramlal, and I'm Pradeep Ramlal. We're great fans of PM Modi ji and yourself. We've come from Durban, and there are 2 questions. One is about the Girmitia community. And many people may not know there is a distinct difference between the Girmitias and the merchant class. And unfortunately, the Girmitia community has been overshadowed by the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. And we believe that the government of India needs to correct some of this history and provide support in rewriting the history. Whether you left Madras presidency or whether you left Calcutta, we would like some support because a lot of that information is in your own archives. The second important one relates to travel. And I was hoping that when you talked about mobility, we as South African diaspora, we're faced with many challenges having to fly via Dubai. And it's not cheap anymore. And I believe that through BRICS, we need a direct flight. The previous High Commissioner and the previous High Commissioner, and when President Ramaphosa was there in 2019, they've made promises, but it's difficult to travel when we have to go and spend our money in Dubai. We'd rather go and spend it in Mumbai or in Delhi or in Chennai. Thank you.
I agree with that, spending money in Mumbai. And, could I request, there's a young lady at the back, if she can be given a chance. I saw her raise her hand, because I think we need some gender balance here. Well, maybe both of them.
Namaste and welcome to our country. My question is, my name is Yashika Singh. I think we've met a little earlier. I'm from Johannesburg, and I want to raise the issue around digital India and digital world. You've spoken quite eloquently a little earlier about how the digitization of India has helped India grow efficiency across different sectors. But the Oxfam report recently says that India accounts for half of the world's gendered digital divide, and a mere 1/3 of its internet users are women. Indian women are 15% less likely to own a mobile phone and 33% less likely to use mobile internet services. Yet, India is pushing on towards digital literacy. It has started literacy programs in poorer sections of the community. What has been the success towards balancing this for women?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, for gracing us with your presence today. My name is Mandira Bagwandine. Like you, I'm an international relations scholar, and my research centers around South-South cooperation and regional integration and development in Africa. Speaking to the latter, I would like to know, what is India's strategy, or how is India approaching the African continental free trade area? And has the African government thought about some form of partnership with the AFCFTA Secretariat in terms of actually, making the African continental free trade area a reality? Thank you.
Thank you. The Girmitya question. We have been very sympathetic to and very supportive of Girmitya communities across the world understand and reclaim their heritage. And I can assure you that, if you have any sort of initiatives or suggestions, please, send it to the High Commissioner or to the Consul General. And it's a subject on which I have taken myself personal history. I was recently in Guyana, a few months before that in Fiji. I've gone to Mauritius quite often, and I do feel that this is an area where it's important that people get full access to their own past. I also know, by the way, that Girmitya communities in particular struggle with OCI issues because they don't always have the necessary records and data, etc. And again, we have taken their connection with India is maintained. We are quite willing to do that. It's something which I think just recently, for example, we've extended the generations for OCI for Suriname. We had done it earlier with Mauritius. So this is one area, I'd be very, very happy to take it forward. It would help me if, I got concrete pointers and sensible advice how to do that. On the flight, I must tell you, the BRICS do not operate an airline. They each operate their airlines. So, I would defend those of the previous years. if, the connections which we were hoping and legitimately expecting did not materialize, because that was the situation of the airline sector in India, that the airlines at that time were in very great distress, and I think in fact you had not just no progress, but even the flights which were coming in stopped coming. I think today there's a sort of good possibility of change. Many of you would have read, we have of course privatized Air India. Air India has placed a very large order for new airplanes. So I think it's a challenge I give to the community, that please make sure that you express enough demand. And I'm sure Air India will note that. And it doesn't have to be just Air India. I think there are at least, I know, one more airline, possibly more than that, who are expanding today. The airlines of India, both the domestic recovery as well as the international profile is actually very strong. So I would be quite hopeful, but I would encourage you to make your interest known in the best possible way to the 2 or 3 Indian, the airlines of India, which are flying outside. And I'm pretty confident that you'll get a positive signal. It may not happen immediately, because even the new inventory of planes will take a little bit to materialize. But as I travel around, I'm seeing more and more places where I hear that flight connections are likely to happen. On the Oxfam issue, look, I'm not personally familiar with the report in question. What I can say, first of all, I want you to understand one thing. There's, among the many changes in India, actually one of the big changes is the gender change. And if I were to give you a single figure which would demonstrate that, it's actually demography. That a decade ago, for 1,000 Indian men, there were 943 Indian women. Today, for 1,000 Indian men, there are 1,020 Indian women. That's an increase of almost 80. And 80 in a decade is actually a huge demographic change, which shows today that the natural, I would say, concern, in most societies, by any sort of non-interventionist standard, the woman should outnumber men. In our case, for a variety of social practices, the figures were pointing in the wrong direction. And I think that correction, to my mind, is a very big change which has happened. But I can only tell you, look, anecdotally, when I see it, I was traveling in a district in Gujarat, which it's a aspirational district called Narmada. When you go into the villages, you look at, say, for example, the health workers, people in charge of the Anganwadis, and you see their digital usage. It's staggering, what it has done. In fact, you can see today in village schools, young girls who are digitally, proficient, and who actually serve as a model for a lot of others. So, it will not change in a day. I can intuitively accept that there'd be many areas where still there'd be big gaps, but I can certainly confidently assert that those gaps are beginning to close very, very rapidly. On the African Free Trade Agreement, a continental FTA actually is clearly a game changer. It will not materialize immediately. It has its own scheduling, as most serious FTAs do. But to me, what it does is you have really a market here, which is the size of India. If you take the African population largely, it's about roughly the same size of India. And given the proximity and given the kind of fit, in a way, that I think has a lot of possibility, and we are today focusing much more on Africa. Under Mr. Modi, he has actually in Africa approved 18 new embassies, of which we have already opened 15. So if you look, actually, which country has the most embassies in Africa, we would certainly rank among the top countries there. So I do see, much stronger business and I would say economic synergies between India and Africa. I'll take one last one.
Okay, the ministers quite kindly agreed to take one more round of questions. So, with our gentleman with the mics, let's take one in the front here. This gentleman next.
Good evening, sir. Your leadership and courage in handling external affairs, commendable. I have one small experience to share in India and one request as well. First, I will say, that experience. I'm from Delhi, so I was in Delhi last month, and my two business associates came from South Africa. So it is related to Digital India. We were standing outside one of the shopping mall in Noida, and this little girl, came to us, started asking money because of the foreigners. And now that gentleman said, I don't have cash. And that little girl said, "Mujhe Paytm kar do." So this is the level of digitalization, we are having right now. It's kind of inspiration, like, how a little girl, she has that access to digital India.
Sure.
Now, my request is, like, we all invest in this country. Many Indians are coming and investing in this country. If we can have a platform where we can have the information regarding our strategic interests of our country, so that we can also invest in a right direction. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable Minister Swamudli, I'm an alderman of the city of Cape Town. Alluding from your wonderful, warm address to us tonight, especially in terms of strengthening relationships, and you also coined the phrase how to do it better and best practices. In regard to that, I'm very passionate about exploring whether the city of Cape Town and a city from India could twin. And I'm keen to put a committee together and work with the consulate and see whether we can make this possible to strengthen the relationship between India and Cape Town.
Sure.
Thank you.
One more.
That gentleman at the back.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your discussion. A few months ago, you said that with the increasing geopolitical tensions that are happening in the world, India doesn't have to choose sides. India can stand on its own ground. So I just wanted to ask, what does it look like practically for India to stand on its own ground within international relations? Thank you.
Thank you.
Strategic guidance. It's hard to put that out in a very sort of sharp way. For a variety of reasons, it changes, it depends on the place. You may not want to be so explicit about it also. So I give you very practical advice. I would say, there's the lady there and these gentlemen here, the High Commission, the consulates, the offices. They are actually, would be very useful to you as resource people. They would be resource people in terms of your indicating interest and their sharing whatever thinking they have. It's up to you to see whether it fits or not, because there isn't like a master plan in that sense. So I can't put it out there and say follow the plan. It's very much a very dynamic sort of situation. On the twinning of cities, there are many cities who've used this well, and I certainly would encourage you to explore this, and maybe we can come up with some options. Typically, you find another city which has enough to share, it's similar enough, but different enough that you can both benefit by that interaction. So I think if I could ask Consul General to look at that, it's something maybe you would like to pursue. This standing your ground, one of the problems of my profession, people quote you back, so I said it at that time in a particular context, but I must explain that context to you, because in a way it's relevant to what we're doing with BRICS as well. Look, for many years, there were countries that dominated the world, and domination doesn't go away that easily. These are very deep. There are habits, there are systems, there's a mindset out there, and they define issues. They would skew your preferences. They will tell you this is right, this is wrong. So you get conditioned in a way. One of the challenges, when we speak about, say, rise of India, how do you decide the merits for yourself? How do you say, okay, this is in the interest of my people or my region or my set, my friends. And then at times you have to stand up to pressures which would compel you to go in a very different direction. What has been happening, and I think will happen more and more, as other countries grow economically, more and more countries will assert that ability. 15 years ago, for example, you had what were called the G7 countries, who are basically Western countries. Today, that G7 has become G20, so you added another 13 countries who are largely non-Western countries, because without them, you couldn't actually take the big global decisions. So you are going to see this spread, this diversity, in a way you can say this democratization. But it will also mean that the new players will have to learn to stand their ground, and that's part of the confidence and of the demonstration of capability of countries. And I know that, it's not a one-time conversation. I mean, it's going to, different situations going to keep throwing up this issue, and we'll have to find ways of navigating it. And I think South Africa in many ways faces similar situations and challenges as well. And part of our bonding is actually this, that, you look at a global situation and say, well, that's what, one party says this, the other party says this, but, we don't entirely, we need to think this one for ourselves, and then stake out a position which is similar. You can say in a way it's all about being more independent and more self-assured. But once again, really, I thank you all, on a weekend for being here, for sharing your time, and I must say it's really been a pleasure to meet all of you. I wish you all well, and I certainly hope to be back here in a few weeks when the bigger meeting on BRICS happens. So thank you very much. Namaskar.
So it gives me great pleasure as we come to the end of this evening's proceedings to thank the Honourable Minister for spending this evening with us. And we hope that you will find opportunity in the future to also enjoy some of our beautiful Cape Town mountains, seas, wines, etc. And that we can welcome you more warmly than the weather has done today.
Thank you.
We'd like to also thank all of you who traveled to Cape Town to be here today and to be part of this gathering. We'd like to extend our thanks to the Cape Town Hindu Seva Samaj for the venue, the Hindu Association of the Western Cape for the organizing, BAPS for helping us with the ushering, our service providers for the sound and the decor, and everybody at the consulate here in Cape Town who put together this event, and the support of the consulates in Durban, Johannesburg, and the Deputy Commissioner in putting today's event together. We want to thank all of you for coming out in this cold weather. We know it's not the best of times to be out of your home, especially when there's load shedding and all the additional difficulties that we have here. But thank you for being here. We're going to conclude with the national anthem, and then we can ask you to please remain seated. There will be photographs taken with the minister up on stage. The ushers will usher you up, and we ask after you've taken your photograph, if you could please return to your seat till all the photographs are taken. Unfortunately, there will be no selfies. So please, row by row, you will come up, but to conclude the program formally, we will now play the national anthem. Please rise. Thank you.